There is a particular kind of silence that feels like abandonment, not the silence before someone answers. The other silence, the one that stretches past the point where you expected a response, into the uncomfortable territory where you begin to wonder if the question was heard at all. You know this silence. Maybe you've been living in it. You prayed, you waited, you checked. You prayed again, and the thing you asked for, the door you needed to open, the person you needed to come back, the situation you needed to shift, stayed exactly where it was. This is the story of three people who lived in that silence longer than felt reasonable, longer than felt kind. Their names were Joseph, Abraham, Lazarus, and what the silence did to each of them, and what it was building, is not what any of them expected. Joseph. He was 17 years old when the dream came, not a vague impression. A vision specific enough to describe sheaves bowing down, stars dipping toward him. His brothers heard it and hated him. His father held it quietly, the way a person holds something precious and strange. And then his brothers threw him in a pit. He was sold to a caravan, taken to Egypt, purchased by a man named Potiphar. He rose, because he was capable, because something seemed to go with him, and then he was falsely accused and thrown into prison. He was 17 when the dream came. He was 30 when it came true. 13 years. In those 13 years, Joseph was not forgotten, but it would have been entirely reasonable to believe he was. The pit, the sale, the false accusation, the prison, each one looked from inside it like a door closing. Each one felt like the dream receding. What was actually happening was different. Every stage was building something, not comfort, capacity. The pit removed the naivety that would have made him dangerous with power. The years in Potiphar's house taught him how Egyptian systems ran, commerce, management, the rhythms of a complex household. The prison introduced him to a cupbearer who would, 2 years later, remember his name at exactly the right moment. Not 1 year of those 13 was wasted. Not 1 year was random. But standing in the pit at 17, looking up at the faces of his brothers, there is no version of that moment that feels like preparation. Abraham. He was 75 years old when the promise came. A son, descendants beyond counting. A nation from his line. He was 100 when Isaac was born. 25 years. In the middle of those 25 years, Abraham grew tired of waiting and moved without permission. His wife suggested it. He agreed. A son was born from another woman, Ishmael. Abraham loved him. He was real and present and alive, but he was not the promise. The years continued. Abraham and Sarah both aged past the biological possibility of children. The text says plainly that Abraham's body was as good as dead. Sarah had passed the age of bearing children by decades. That was the moment Isaac arrived. Not at 75, when the body was still capable, not at 85, when it might still have been explained. At 100, when the only explanation for the birth was not biology. This was not an accident of timing. If Isaac had been born when Abraham was first called, there would always have been a human explanation. A late child, people would say. These things happen. He had to be born from a body that could no longer produce him, because the point was never the child alone. The point was the source. Lazarus. The message came directly. Lord, the one you love is sick. And Jesus stayed where he was for 2 more days. Not because he didn't receive the message, not because other things were more urgent. The record says plainly that he loved Lazarus, loved Mary, loved Martha, and then it says he stayed. By the time he arrived, Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days. 4 days matters. In the tradition of that time and place, there was a belief that the soul lingered near the body for 3 days after death, that something like return might still be possible within that window. On the 4th day, the soul had fully departed. The body had begun to change. Even Martha, who believed in resurrection at the end of time, said it plainly. Lord, by this time there is an odor. 4 days was not carelessness. 4 days was the exact moment at which no alternative explanation for what followed would be possible. Martha met Jesus on the road and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. She said what we all say when the timing makes no sense. If you had been here, if you had come sooner, if you had moved when I asked. Jesus wept. Not because the situation was out of control, because the people he loved were in pain, and the pain was real, even though he already knew how it would end. Then he walked to the tomb and called the dead man out. 4 days, not 3, not 2, not 1, 4. Because 3 would have left room for doubt. 3 people, 3 different weights. Joseph, 13 years. Abraham, 25 years. Lazarus, 4 days. The lengths are different, the weight is the same, and in each case, the same pattern beneath the surface. The weight was not negligence, it was construction. Something was being built that required exactly the timeline it received. Joseph needed every year of that preparation. Abraham needed the biological impossibility to be total. Lazarus needed the 4th day to remove every alternative explanation. The delay was not the absence of care. The delay was the shape of what was being made. There is a version of this truth that gets delivered as comfort. God's timing is perfect, just trust Him. And it lands like a platitude because it costs nothing to say and asks everything of the person hearing it. This is not that. This is an observation about a pattern in 3 specific stories, documented in a specific ancient text, not softened or resolved too quickly, where the delay is examined plainly. Jesus stayed 2 days, Abraham waited 25 years. Joseph sat in prison for crimes he did not commit. The record does not pretend these delays were easy. Martha wept before she believed. Joseph wept when he finally saw his brothers years after the pit. The Hagar story exists because Abraham could not hold the weight without reaching for a shortcut. They were not immune to the weight of it. They were sustained through it, often barely, never cleanly. So here you are, waiting for something. Maybe something you've been carrying so long that the hope has gone quiet. Not gone, just quieter. Maybe something you've stopped telling people about because explaining the weight has become its own kind of exhaustion. The question underneath everything, why is God taking so long, is not a faithless question. It is the honest question. And the honest answer, drawn from 3 stories that did not sanitize their pain, is this. The delay is not the answer. It is not a no. It may be the most expensive part of the yes. Joseph's 13 years built the man who could hold a nation's resources without corruption. Abraham's 25 years produced a son whose birth required no natural explanation. Lazarus's 4 days created a moment that no one present could attribute to anything ordinary. The weight was not decoration. The weight was structural. You do not have to pretend the waiting is easy. You do not have to stop asking why. But while you ask, consider that something may be being built in the time it's taking that could not have been built any other way. He was not early. He was never late.